On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Ever Forward versus Ever Given, grounding and salvage. I am your host, Sal Mercogliano. I'm a former merchant mariner and a maritime historian. So obviously there's a lot going on with the grounding of the motor vessel Ever Forward, nearly a year to the day after the grounding of Ever Given in the Suez Canal. What I like to do in this video today is compare first the grounding of the two vessels, how both vessels grounded, because they have a similar element here in their grounding, and then discuss the salvage of the two, Ever Given that has been salvaged and Ever Forward, which will need to be salvaged. But before I do so, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. Be sure to share it across social media, leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, support us via Patreon. So let's go ahead and take a look first at Ever Given's grounding. So those of you new to the channel, I started this channel during the Ever Given's grounding. I was asked to give some expert advice on the grounding on some news shows. And, you know, when you go on a show, you only have a few seconds to a few minutes to talk about it. And I did not have enough time. So I started a channel that was initially called What's Going On in the Suez, but now it's morphed into What's Going On with Shipping. And I talk about all things global oceanic shipping. But this goes right back to the heart of this. So I had an episode where I did specifically break down what happened with Ever Given. This was the title of it. I was in a very big kind of movie analogy type. So it was going, what's going on in the Suez, the Titanic edition, iceberg right ahead, when in truth it was the Suez Canal. So let me go ahead and walk you through the Ever Given's grounding, because I think that'll set the tone for what happened with Ever Forward. So this is a 2D, 3D animation of Ever Given that I used in my video to explain how Ever Given, now if you remember Ever Given, this is March 23rd of last year, so nearly a year ago. Ever Given was a much larger ship. She was nearly 400 meters, 20,000 boxes. Ever Forward is about 325 meters, just under 12,000 boxes. Ever Given was heading northbound in the Suez Canal. And I should mention, she just went through the Suez Canal. She was outside the Suez Canal yesterday, heading through the Suez Canal today. So she's following this same route, hopefully having better luck going through it. She was proceeding northbound through the canal, going in. I'm going to speed this up a bit because I don't want it to take as long. So the Ever Given was heading northbound in the canal. And what happened is Ever Given is a very large ship, and she's very constrained within this waterway. And the Suez Canal is fixed on the side, it has banks, and there's a deep channel it needs to be in. Now, Ever Given was also encountering some issues, high winds that day. High winds meant that it was pushing against the container boxes. The ship had on board an Egyptian pilot, actually had 2 Egyptian pilots on board. And normally what happens on a ship is the master of the vessel, the ultimate person in command, will give navigation over to the pilot, but the master still is ultimately responsible. You'll notice here, Ever Given gets very close to the western bank there for a few seconds. She gets really close and they start pulling her off the bank. You have to do very small course changes. You can't do large course changes. If you do large course changes on a ship, ships don't turn the way your car turns. When you turn the wheel of your car turns the front of the vehicle. When you turn the wheel of a ship, you turn the back of the vehicle, it kicks out. And what happens here is Ever Given starts encountering an effect known as bank suction. She starts running close to the shore. She did it on the west side. Now you'll see her doing on the east side. As her stern gets close to the bank, it wants to pull in. At the same time, the bow wants to push off. There's a wave pushed out from the bow and it wants to push off. And so the bow tends to push off, the stern tends to suck in. Now, this happens in both a canal and when there's shallow and deep water around. So Ever Given is having this issue. Now, where this is similar to what happened with Ever Forward is to overcome this, the pilot's decision was to speed up. Matter of fact, Ever Given starts to speed up. You'll see her speed here increasing till she's almost at 13 knots at a point. That's the speed over ground. You'll see SOG there, that's speed over ground. Now, all of a sudden, she yaws to the one side of the channel, gets close, tries to overcompensate and runs smack into the shallow water on the eastern side, the Asian side of the canal, runs her bow into the eastern side, and she still has forward momentum, and that pulls the stern onto the western bank and now onto the African coast. And now Ever Given is sideways in the channel. Her bow is aground in Asia, her stern is up on Africa, and she's hanging over the Suez Canal. That is what happened with Ever Given. These are the famous images of Ever Given in the canal. You'll see her bow there up against the eastern bank, her stern on the southern bank. Now, what you're seeing here, the initial attempt to move her was unsuccessful. And let me be clear, you weren't going to move her. Her bow and stern are aground. And I think I have an image here, right here. This is the image you have. This is the bow and stern is aground. But notice her center is floating. And matter of fact, Ever Given was in a very precarious situation. Ships are designed to float. They're not designed to touch bottom at all. What happens is when you touch bottom, you put forces on the hull that's not expected. And so in the case of Ever Given, she was suspended from her ends. And what that meant was the center was trying to float, but wasn't at times, and which means all the weight was on the end. There was a big concern that this vessel would crack in half and break. The other problem you have here, as you see in this video, is these dredges started dredging. They dredged along the port side, the forward left side of the vessel, and the back right side of the vessel to clear out around the prop and the screw. And what they were doing was cleaning it out. The very famous image here of dredging with the little digger there along the Suez Canal. By the way, rumors are the little digger has been loaded on a ship and is coming across to Maryland right now. It's unconfirmed, but let's hope the little digger is on his way. But as you dredge here and dredge there, the plan was to pivot Ever Given. Now, let me be clear, difference between Ever Given and Ever Forward too. Ever Given is blocking the Suez Canal for 6 days. What that means is vessels were accumulating at both ends of the canal as she shuts the canal down. As she shuts the canal, all of a sudden now, once that canal is blocked, ships start to gather on north and south end. You're stopping the flow of 12% of the world trade. And this creates a huge backlog that takes place. Eventually, what happens here is they have to free her. They have to free her. But before we get into the salvage, I just wanted to talk about how she's suspended. So her bow is rammed up onto the Asian shore. Her Ever Given lost control in the Suez, basically to overcome that motion of bank suction where she was pendulating from one end of the canal to the other. The ship's pilots decided to speed up. And speeding up gives you more control of the vessel, but it also means that the faster you go, the less time you have to react. And if there is a problem, the impact is going to be magnified. And that's how Ever Given got sideways in the Suez. Let's go to Ever Forward. So this is a latest on Ever Forward, some images this morning from the channel out of Baltimore showing Ever Forward aground just outside the Craig Hill channel here. I want to go back to that scene there for just 1 second, because one of the things you'll notice is the vessel has a bit of a list. She's listing to port to her left side, meaning her starboard side is a little bit higher out of the water. So she's got a slight list to her port side. That's going to be important as we talk about this in a minute. The vessel, unlike Ever Given, is not aground just at the bow and the stern. She's completely aground, meaning she has rammed up onto a shoal, an embankment, and meaning all underneath, the entire length of the hull is sitting on ground. Now, fortunately, this is soft ground, but she is sitting on the ground. I got a series of pictures to share. I will share them with you now. So somebody I know at the Master Mates and Pilots Association in Baltimore was able to get out in a boat and take these images here so that you can see her. One of the images you see here are the red buoys. This is the red buoy number 16. Back here is red buoy 14. That is the end of the channel right here. The channel is to the right here. She is outside the channel. which means she left the deep water of Craig Hill. According to my friend that went around the vessel, they sounded it with a depth finder. She's in about 17 to 24 feet of water. She draws about 42 feet when she left from the dock at Baltimore. Kind of hard to see here. She's put an anchor down so that she's technically an anchor now, which allows the watch to change on the vessel. But one of the things you'll see here are her draft marks. Her draft marks are in meters. And the larger markers right there, you can see she's got about 4 meters up out of the water. She should be down to just a little bit of the red showing, but she's got 4 meters. That's 13 feet pushed up out of the way on the bow. That's a lot of surface. Understand, she's sitting on mud right now. So she is physically sitting on mud, which means she's compressing the mud, but she's also compressing herself on there, meaning she's potentially crushing her bottom by the weight. It's not designed for the bottom of the ship to support the weight. There's buoyancy happening now. Plus, her center of gravity has changed, what's called her metacentric height, and meaning she's very unstable at this point. We'll talk about this during the salvage operation. You can see again her way out of the channel here. You can see from the bow being up all the way to the stern. Stern is not as high, but you can see the stern rudder right here being shown. Again, outside that channel. Again, ever forward. One of the things to note, a couple of things too, is the number of boxes. These are 40-foot by 8-foot by 8-foot boxes. So if you look here going across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 boxes across. So you got 18 boxes across. You got 2, 4, 6, 7 boxes high above the main deck, probably another 7 boxes below the waterline. Gives you an idea of the size of this vessel. These are the same boxes you see going up and down the highways. She carries almost 12,000 boxes on board. Again, Ever Given carried almost 20,000. And so you're getting the full image here of the vessel and where she lies. You can see how high her midship is out of the water. And again, those buoy markers where she's at. So obviously she's in a pretty bad situation. I want to show you an animation now of her leaving. So the animation I'm going to show you right now was done by John Scott Railton. He did a great job. His very first video he's ever done for this. If you don't follow, there's key people to follow on Twitter. Twitter has many negatives to him, I know, but one of the positives is you can follow people, and he is great. I've followed him for a long time. We've talked and known each other. And so he did this video I want to share with you right now. It's excellent. It's the very first video he's done, which is just incredible to me on this. So I want to share his video. I'm going to have the video linked into the show notes so you can watch it. I don't have the audio playing because I want to talk over him. And so I just want to be able to discuss it here a little bit for you. But he did a great job. He pulled this from Marine Traffic. So this is the vessel up at the Dundalk Terminal in Baltimore. This is Ever Forward. You'll notice a couple of things here as it's going on here. So I'm going to pause it here for a second. She's being helped off the berth by several tugboats, the Lynn Moran, the April Moran, and the Z1. The white area is the deep channel. So she does not have the ability to come off the dock by herself. So she's got tugs that are helping her. And this is at about 9:50 at night on the 13th that this happened. So she's being eased out. You'll see her speed right here coming off, not moving very much. They're spinning her around at this moment. Lynn Moran is on the back. I have a class I teach, a master's class in maritime industry policy for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And one of my students was an engineer on board the Lynn Moran. So we talked about this last night. She will be coming off the dock with a Baltimore Harbor docking pilot. The docking pilot probably got off on the Z1. The docking pilot's job is to coordinate with the tugs and with the vessel, throwing off lines, pulling them out, and getting them into the channel. And you'll see Lynn Moran following along, April Moran and Z1 alongside. Probably the docking pilot came off at this point. You see the Z1 leaving there. Now the vessel is in the channel coming out. Now, all ships are required in Chesapeake Bay to have a pilot on board of foreign registry. So this is a Hong Kong flagged vessel. Evergreen is a Taiwanese company. So she has a Chesapeake Bay pilot on board. Now, pilots provide guidance, they provide expertise, and the masters will typically give command of the vessel, the con, over to the pilot. That does not alleviate the master of his or her responsibility of the vessel. The pilot provides the expertise. Pilots are educated and trained. It takes years to become a pilot. You have to apprentice to do this. You have to train under a pilot, and then you're doing it. And one of the things that you'll notice here as Ever Forward leaves, she's in a really narrow channel. One of the things that's happened recently is the ports on the East Coast, Baltimore, Charleston, Savannah, New York, have dredged their harbors. They've dredged these channels. The Craig Hill Channel used to go down to 38 feet. It now goes down to 51 feet. They do that to handle new vessels that can go through the Panama Canal, the new lane that opened in 2016. That new lane can handle larger vessels. Prior to 2016, the biggest container vessel was about 5,000 boxes. Now you can get ships 12,000 boxes through there. Ever Forward is one of these. But understand, this is a tight channel. If you go outside that channel, you're in shallow water, very similar to the Suez Canal. Now, notice this channel is not wide enough to turn around in. You can go sideways in this channel just like you can go in the Suez. The bank suction effect is not as pronounced, but in the Suez, you have sheer walls. You don't have that coming out of Baltimore coming out. So the vessel is coming out, and you'll notice these larger little areas. These are usually where the turns are. Because ships kick their stern out and they kind of slide, you need larger areas to do this. So she's heading outbound now, about 7 knots, heading down the Craig Hill Channel, heading about southeast, heading down. You'll see she's coming up to another area where she's going to have to make a turn, and she's gaining speed at this point. She's increasing speed and kicking out. So now she's coming out. She's in the Craig Hill Channel upper range. Now, what does a range mean? Let me show you this on the chart. So this is a site, and it's an app called Marine Waves, which superimposes over a GPS the nautical charts for a specific area. NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, does the charts. These are public service charts. You can download them. But you'll see right here, this is the terminal she was at right here. So here's the marine terminal she was at. She was right here up against this berth. You'll see the water. The water here is, I made a mistake in an earlier video. I said these are in fathoms. They're not, they're in meters. Back in my day, they were in fathoms, but now they're in meters. You'll see the channel right here where she came down through the channel. She made her turn. And one of the things you'll hear are ranges. There's a series of lights, 2 lights that are superimposed one above the other. And what a range does is when you're out of the range, they're not in line. But when you're in range, they're right above each other. They're superimposed right above each other. And that gives you an ability to determine where you are. So if you line up on your ranges, either looking down the range or back range behind you, you can see where you are in the channel. Of course, this ship has radar and, most importantly of all, a buoyage system. You'll see right here a buoy system. Red on the right and green on the left. And you'll see that throughout here. So as she comes down into this channel, you'll see these buoys, and she's turning right here. And again, there are ranges here. She's in the upper range. This is that upper range she's talking about. And each of these buoys are separately marked. They are numbered. So for example, right here, we'll zoom in here a bit. You'll see right here, buoy 26, a red buoy. Red buoys are always even numbers. Greens are odds. Here's the green. And then they have these markings right here, flashing 1 red every 6 seconds. So this buoy will be identified by flashing 1 red light every 6 seconds. This is a quick flashing green light every 1 second. So every 1 second, a flash. And you'll see it's marked with courses right here on here. And so this is the electronic navigation system they would be going by. And as you come by the buoys, you'd be tracking where you are. You want to go right between the buoys, red on the left, green on the right as you're coming out. Let's go ahead and head back to the video here. So you see her coming out, and she's coming in. This is the next big change. And as she makes this change, there are two things that happen here I really want to highlight. Number one, she speeds up again. And she makes a slight course change coming into this next bend. You'll see it's much wider right here. There are buoy markers right here, and they're heading into the southbound lane, due south. And Ever Forward is speeding up at this point. She's coming almost to 13 knots at this point. And she's making a slight course change, but then she doesn't make the second course change. Why she doesn't make the second course change, we don't know. The pilot's on board, the master's on board. She's got maneuverability. She has her engine turning. She's speeding up, as a matter of fact, at this point. She's made course changes at this point. We just don't know why they don't make the next course change. She had turned right here at this green buoy. That should have been the indication for her when she gets a beam of that buoy to start her turn, start swinging in, aiming between this red and green buoy. There is a back range light she can go on, and these red lights are the outer markers. And yet she basically field goal posts between the green and red marker here and heads directly off. She doesn't turn. You'll see a slight little turn there at the end, but then she basically runs aground right there. And she is firm aground in 7.3 meters of water. She basically goalposts right between the green and red, but never makes the change of the turn. And we don't know why. And again, we can sit there and have suppositions, but we don't know why. Now, the ship has a voyage data recorder on board, which records the bridge conversations. It measures all the electronic impulses, the course, the GPS, everything. So the Coast Guard, when they boarded the vessel, and they would have boarded this vessel immediately, would do several things. Number one, they would seize the VDR. Now, you can't change the VDR, even if you're on the ship, it's encrypted. So they would have the VDR taken. They would do drug tests of all the major players involved to make sure there's no incapacitation of everybody. They would get statements from everyone, but this is not for release at this point. We're not going to hear about this until this point. There were two tugs that came on position, the Eric McAllister and the April Moran. They are never going to pull her off. Let me be clear. These are not going to pull them off. This ship is sitting on land. She has wedged herself up on an embankment. So her entire bottom is touching. Have you ever seen people take phone books and interlace the phone pages and try to pull them apart? You can't do it because of the friction. That's her right now. She is sitting on that embankment, pushing down on the embankment, pushing on her bottom. There's been no leakage yet from the vessel. We don't see an oil leak or a fuel leak. Understand the fuel tanks are on the bottom of this vessel. And so one of the things we expect to see happen here shortly is booms, containment booms come out to surround the vessel should she start leaking. I'm not going to be surprised to start seeing some sheen from this vessel as it sits there and rocks on that embankment, because any little debris or anything, this is a soft mud embankment, fortunately. This is spill from the dredging that's dumped over there. But there's still going to be rocks and stuff in there, and that's going to be pressing against the hull, and you may see something happen there. This is a really precarious situation the vessel is in right now. These two tugs and any tugs right now are not going to be able to get her off. Now, the positive thing is she's not in the main shipping channel. She went right outside the channel, meaning the traffic to Baltimore is still flowing. So we're still seeing vessels go to and from Baltimore. There's not going to be as much of a rush to do the salvage. So we don't know, again, why Ever Forward missed that last turn. Why is it that she came into this position and basically missed the... This is also a post that was done. And one of the things you'll see here is she makes a slight change of course, but then proceeds right here, goalpost between the two buoys, and heads right out. She should have been turning as she became a beam of the green light. As she passed that green light, a beam definitely basically just passed. And again, you can identify it by the signal. Let's go over the marine waves right here. Here's the signal for it, a flashing one light green every 4 seconds. Again, this one is a quick flashing every 1 second. This one is a click flashing every 1 second. So you know, for example, this is very unique. It's got a very slow beep to it every 4 seconds. You're seeing it. And then you would see these lights. I mean, this is a straight 180 course down here, due south. You would see these green and red lights, like almost like a landing pattern there lined up. We know the visibility was good. We know there was light winds, so there shouldn't have been an issue for making the turn. We know the vessel made the turn, but instead she didn't make the turn, went out right here between buoys 16 and 14, showed you them in it. So now she's aground, and now we have to deal with the issue of salvage. So usually in a salvage operation, there are 3 major concerns. So one of them is life safety. You know, do you have to hurry up the salvage to save life? Well, in both cases, Ever Given and Ever Forward, there was no life endangerment at the time. Number 2, environmental concerns. Are you going to do something that's going to do something worse to the environment that has not already been done? And then 3rd, the integrity and safety of the vessel, and also monetary issues. In the case of Ever Given, no life issue, but the issue was the closing of the Suez Canal. This vessel went sideways across the Suez Canal and shut up basically global trade. And so the Egyptians, along with Evergreen and then the salvage company Smith Salvage, which is a subsidiary of Bocalis, basically decided that they are going to take risks in this salvage operation. They emphasized time over what normally would be safety. Now, it's not that they weren't safe, but usually salvage guys do things very slow, very methodically. And everyone I talked to regarding the Ever Given salvage is like, wow, that was quick and it was fast. Began to basically remove silt and material from the vessel. As I mentioned to you before, if you look at her from above, you're having all this debris move from her port bow, the left side forward, and the starboard side aft. And the idea here is they're going to rotate her counterclockwise. What they really want to do is get the stern free into the channel. And then once her stern is free, pull on her off the embankment and get her up. And that's exactly what winds up happening. They initially try to pull her. That doesn't work. They then do this dredging operation. And then what they do is they set this up. They pull the stern free. They bring in 2 large salvage tugs. Now, tugs pulling on a fixed object doesn't work. Your prop spinning, that doesn't work. What salvage tugs do is they set out anchors. They anchor themselves into the bottom. And then they fix the anchor, the big, huge mushroom-shaped anchors, digs in. And then what they do is they affix themselves to the vessel, in the case Ever Given, the stern. And then what these salvage tugs did, the Alp Guard, for example, is they pull on that bow anchor and they pull on that tow line of the stern. And they basically do a Captain America off the top of the building, try to pull it in. And what they were able to do on 29 March was pull the stern free. Now, the bow is still stuck. Remember, she is free floating in the middle. They were able to pull the stern free. They waited for the next high tide. They had a good range of tide. They had almost a 3 to 4 foot tide in the Suez Canal. And what they waited was for 12 hours for the next tide. And then using the salvage tugs plus the ship's engine, they were able to turn the engine reverse, and they pulled her off into the channel and then moved her up. Now, normally in a salvage operation, when they got the stern free, they would have sent divers down, investigated the bottom. They would have done a huge amount of research on this before they attempted to get the bow free. But they decided to pull the bow free and then sail her under her own power, which is another amazing thing, into the Great Bitter Lake to clear the canal. And if you're interested in this, I'll link to this video right here, Why Ships Crash, investigating the Ever Given crash in the Suez Canal. It's a BBC Two documentary. I'm in it. I gave some talk on this, but this goes really more in depth on the Ever Given salvage. So let's talk about what they may be doing with Ever Forward. So unlike Ever Given, Ever Forward is completely aground. So it's not just her bow and her stern that's up, it's the entire length of the vessel. And you can see that here by the angle. She's up higher at the bow than she is at the stern, but she is physically up, which means a couple of things. She is not buoyant at this point. She's just, the center of gravity is just acting downward on her. So she is pushing downward at this point. She rammed into the channel again. You know, she went into this channel and she has plowed a trench through that area, but that area will start to backfill behind her. So one of the things you would think is, well, we'll pull her off stern first. We'll pull her off by the back through that channel she dredged. So the problem about pulling her backwards like that is, number one, is as you pull her, you will have to dredge from where she went in all the way back to the channel to get her out. Now she's still up on land, but so you're going to have to yank her off, which means a lot of force is going to be needed. You're going to need a lot of salvage tugs to pull this. You're going to have to anchor salvage tugs out here somewhere and pull her backwards into this. The problem is the stern and the prop are going to want to pile mud up against it as you pull her. She's going to want to pull down into the mud. And that means you're going to have to pull a little dredge, pull a little dredge. That is a long, laborious operation to do. And so you're going to want to basically do that. If you do that, it's going to take a long time. The other option that you would have is, okay, well, she's just outside the channel. Let's pull her by the bow. Let's rotate her kind of clockwise, try to drag the bow toward the channel and pull her. You know, let's see if we can pull her sideways or get her bow and pivot her. The problem is, again, her metacentric height, her center of gravity is changed. She is not buoyant at this point. She's sitting on land. And not only is she sitting on land, she's up and at an angle. She's leaning to the port side here. If you start pulling on her while she's on land and she's not buoyant, there's a potential for her to roll. And you have to be careful about that. You can't just dredge along the side here and get her off the embankment onto deeper water, because the fear is she will roll. That was a big fear with Ever Given. Remember, Ever Given pivoted butt. So they dredged the starboard side forward and the port side aft. So she was able to pivot. This is, you got to pull her to her starboard side, and you can't just throw a batch of salvage tugs on her and yank her, because you may pull her over. And that is a dangerous prospect. So I know some of you are screaming right now at the screen right now, because you're sitting there going, well, Sal, you need to make her lighter. I know. First thing they will do is get the fuel off her. They will get that fuel off her. Again, that fuel's in the double bottom. They have to worry about environmental issues. That's going to be number one. So expect to see a fueling barge out here and get the fuel off her as soon as they can. Second, the containers. Everyone's going to want to take containers off her. So she came through from Asia, through the Panama Canal, went to Savannah, probably offloaded probably about 30% of her cargo at Savannah and took on board empty containers. Went to Baltimore, probably took off about 20% of her containers and took on return containers. So she's probably, between the empties and some containers going back to Europe, probably about 60% full, 40% empty. I know you see containers everywhere on her, but some of those containers will be empty. And those cells, depending on which cells she offloaded, would have full and empty containers on board. Obviously, you want to get the full containers off. The problem with these vessels is their size. They are huge. Again, she's over 1,000 feet long. These containers are 8 foot high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 containers, 8 foot high. That's 56 feet right there you're talking about. That is just to the top of above the main deck. You still probably have that same amount right here. You're talking over 100-foot height right here that we're talking about. And that just gets you to the outer containers, not to the inner containers. And some of you are screaming right now, well, Sal, let's use helicopters. Containers are heavy. They max out the weight of most helicopters, even the largest military containers, military helicopters. Even empty containers would max out most helicopters. You're talking about 20 to 40 tons in a container. That is more than the carriage capacity of most helicopters. And getting containers is the issue they had with Ever Given. She was really tough to do. Now, Ever Given, again, is bigger. She was 24 containers across. She was higher, about 12 to 15 containers high. So she was a lot different. But Ever Forward still poses this problem. You can start trying to get containers off. Now, in the worst case, in an absolute worst case environment, you can topple stacks. You can pull the top stack and start toppling them in the water. That is worst case. I can't imagine they would do that because of the pollution and the danger of doing that. I don't see that happening, but they can bring out cranes with large cranes on them to start getting them off. But understand that's slow. That is a slow process. It takes 2 minutes typically to cycle and load a single container at pierside. If you're talking about doing this at anchor, that is a long, laborious process, but getting the weight off is going to be key. I think looking at this is going to be a massive lightening the vessel, dredging operation as much as they can. But the dredging operation is going to have to be a tall one. Remember, they can dredge under the vessel through injections, through kind of almost like a vacuum system, but they got to be worried about the stresses they put on the hull. Since this entire vessel now is resting on the mud, if you start dredging, for example, at the bow, and you start getting gaps between the bottom and the bow, you put weight and stresses on the vessel, you can crack the vessel, you can break it. And so I guess what I'm telling you is this is not an easy salvage. This is going to take time to do. Now, the other issue you have here is a concern with the tides. There's almost no tide here. You only have about a foot tide. And to tell you the truth, that tide is more wind than anything else. It's really not a tide. This is the tide for right here in the Craig Hill Channel. You only have about a foot tide. At Suez, they had about 4 foot tide, which helped a lot. You also can't use the ship's engines here because it is in the mud. So if you turn that over, you're going to damage it. Your water intakes are clogged. Your water intakes for this vessel may be encumbered with mud. Who knows? So you can't really run the engines at this point and use that. So you're going to have to bring in salvage to do this. And it's going to be a laborious salvage. It's not going to be quick and easy. Ever Given was lucky that it only took 6 days. But again, there was a priority there because of the issue with opening the canal. They took some risks with that salvage that you normally wouldn't take, but they were willing to take those chances, the Suez Canal Authority, to open the canal back up because they were right at the tipping point. They had almost 400 vessels waiting to go through the canal. In this case, they have to worry about environmental issues. They don't want an oil spillage in there, even though she's running on diesel fuel. You don't want that spillage into the Chesapeake Bay, the crab, the clams, the fishing. They don't want that at all. So you're going to be a long, methodical process about this. And I just want to add one further note on this. A lot of people are going, wow, Evergreen. Again, I understand that. And I understand everyone sitting there. And even I said it. How could they miss that channel turn? Understand, these ships are running every day up and down channels just like this with no incidents. We rarely see this happen. I know it seems to happen. You know, this happened a year ago, Sal. There was just one with a Maersk vessel in Germany. I did a video on that. We just had a Norwegian cruise ship do the same thing coming out of Puerto Plata, where they did it. But again, I would argue that's not the norm. I mean, how many cruise ships come out of port every day? You don't hear anything. These issues always come down to 2 things: human errors, mechanical failures. And lots of time, those mechanical failures are due to human error. Question I raised, number 1, why didn't she make the turn? Why was she not she initiated part of the turn, but she didn't make the second turn? Second, speed. Why were they doing 13 knots at that time? Is that the normal speed that that turn is made at? One of the things that you need to understand is that's a one-way channel. For ships to go through that channel, they have to clear that channel. This is marine traffic. You'll see Ever Forward sitting there right now. She is just off that channel. Here is the Bay Bridge right here in Annapolis, Annapolis right over here. But you'll see ships waiting to come in. A lot of these ships are bulk carriers scheduled to come into Baltimore, but also you have container ships that will wait here for the berth to free up before she comes off. If you come up to the Dundalk terminal where she was at, right here, you'll see a ship, the Honor, that's actually the car carrier right there, excuse me, right here. Here's the MSC Barbara. Prior to this, a Maersk ship was on this berth. Over here, you'll see the Minstrel. So you'll see vessels like this. They have to clear the berth to get these vessels on. And so there's a tight schedule. Were they operating under a tight schedule to get the Ever Forward off the berth, through the channel, clear the bay bridges and to bring the next vessel up? I don't know. Those are questions that are going to need to be addressed. What happens here is going to be a long investigative process. The NTSB, the National Transportation Security Board, will be on board working with the Coast Guard, the pilots associations, both Maryland pilots, the Chesapeake Bay pilots, which are now combined together. They'll be investigating the American pilot who's on board. The crew of the vessel will be, taking depositions. They'll talk to everybody involved. But usually these investigations take a year till we hear anything. But the salvage will be ongoing. So anyway, I hope I covered everything. I know there's a lot in here and I apologize, but there's a lot to cover in this comparison. I'll break this video into parts so that you can get right to the parts for it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Go ahead, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. Listen, I probably got things wrong. I am not perfect by any means. And if I made something wrong, leave a comment. Be constructive. Let's use this as a dialogue to talk about this. One of the things I try to do with my channel is educate people about global shipping because it's an invisible industry that most people don't ever see. So my goal is to kind of take those barriers down, open it up, and allow people to see what's happening in the maritime industry. So please let me know what you think about it. Share it across social media. And if you can, support the channel by becoming a Patreon. So until our next video, Sal, signing off.